When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.B Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, description on one wire service, master criminal.
36 passengers got off the jetliner in Seattle last night. Left aboard 4 crew members and the hijacker, dressed in a business suit, demanding $200,000. Snow covers the mountains in Northern California and Nevada, a hostile terrain for any parachute drop, especially at night. Parachute escape from a flying 727 somewhere between Reno and Seattle, Washington.
Welcome back to part 2 of D.B Cooper. We went over a lot of info in part 1. We went over the whole hijacking. We went over the evidence. Now we're going to go over the theories, what actually went down, and the suspects in the case. The FBI made some of its conclusions, but not all of them, over the past 52 years. The FBI used eyewitness evidence from the passengers and flight crew to make the first sketch, known as Composite A. It was completed a few days after the hijacking, and it was released to the public on November 28, 1971. The witnesses apparently said the composite did not look like Cooper, or have his disinterested look. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner told the FBI that the sketch was a very poor likeness of Cooper. After the FBI was told repeatedly that Composite A did not accurately portray Cooper, a second composite sketch was completed. It was completed in late 1972, and it was known as Composite B. It was intended to more accurately depict Cooper's age, skin tone, and the shape of his face. Most of the eyewitnesses believed that the sketch did more accurately depict him, but his face looked far too angry or nasty. Other eyewitnesses said Composite B depicted a man that was far older than Cooper and had a lighter complexion than Cooper did. After the criticisms of Composite B, the FBI artists made adjustments and they improved the sketch. It was finished January 2nd, 1973. One flight attendant said it was a very close resemblance. In April 1973, the FBI stated that Composite Sketch B was the best likeliness of Cooper that they could develop, and it should be considered the definitive sketch of D.B. Cooper. Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow had spent the most time interacting with D.B. Cooper, and they gave nearly identical descriptions of the man. He was around 5 foot 10 inches tall, in his mid-40s, short, black hair combed back, 170 to 180 pounds, olive skin tone with no discernible accent. Mucklow did not remember the color of his eyes, but Schaffner believed they were brown. The FBI relied mostly on the testimony of Bill Mitchell, who sat across from Cooper during the flight from Portland to Seattle. He was interviewed multiple times during the creation of Composite Sketch B. His descriptions of Cooper were nearly the same as the flight attendants, but thought Cooper might have been an inch shorter at 5'9", and he referred to him as slight. Robert Gregory described Cooper as being 5'9", and he believed he was either Mexican-American or American Indian descent. Cooper was apparently familiar with the Seattle area and may have possibly been an Air Force veteran. He recognized Tacoma from the air, and his comments to Mucklow that McChord Air Force Base was around 20-minute driving time from Seattle Tacoma Airport. The FBI believed his financial situation was very likely desperate. Retired FBI Chief Investigator Ralph Himsbach believed extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money almost always do so because they need it urgently. Otherwise, the crime is not worth the risk. The FBI released an 8-page suspect profile in May of '73, claiming that Cooper was a military-trained parachutist and not a sport skydiver because of his comfort level with military-style parachutes. He would have been an outlier in sport skydiving, which would have increased the likelihood that somebody in the community would have recognized him. The FBI believed that he was somebody who exercised regularly due to his athletic look despite his age. They also believed he was not a heavy drinker or an alcoholic, because the one drink he was given spilled and he did not ask for another one. The FBI calculated the number of cigarettes that he would most likely smoked in a day by counting the time and the number of cigarettes that he smoked during the flight. They believed he smoked somewhere around 1 pack of cigarettes a day. The FBI also believed that he was more intelligent than the common criminal due to his vocabulary level and proper use of aviation-related terms. He did not use foul language, he had a calm demeanor, he was nicely dressed, and he showed respect to the female flight attendants. Cooper's ability to adapt to various situations led the FBI profilers to believe that he was the type of person who did not use an accomplice. FBI agents believed that Cooper took his alias from a Belgian comic series featuring the fictional Dan Cooper, a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot. The comics never made it to the United States. They believed he encountered them during a deployment in Europe. The FBI also believed that Cooper carefully planned the hijacking, and he had detailed knowledge of aviation, local terrain, and the capabilities of a 727. They believed Cooper chose the seat in the last row to observe and respond to any action in the front, to minimize the possibility of being approached or attacked from behind and make himself less conspicuous to other passengers. He asked for 4 parachutes instead of 1 to trick the authorities into believing that he would be taking hostages, so they didn't try to disable his parachute. He brought a bomb to stop any attempt to rush him. He was careful not to leave evidence. He had Tina Mucklow give him back all the notes he had written. He also took his empty matchbook with him. But he did not take all the evidence. He did leave behind his tie, which was discussed in the first part of the video, along with all of his cigarette butts, which unfortunately went missing later. Cooper was definitely familiar with the 727, but they believed he chose this specifically because it had the aft airstair and the placement of the 3 engines in the back, which would make it easier for him to jump from the aircraft.
The plane headed for Reno. It took 3.5 hours, slow for a jet, but the hijacker had given detailed flight instructions. The rear stairwell was open all the way. It arrived at Reno in shreds. The crew, here being debriefed by the FBI, was told to fly low over Oregon's flatlands with the flaps down. The speed dropped to 200 miles per hour. Somewhere, the hijacker parachuted away with the money. The crew had little to say.
Cooper seemed familiar with the refueling time of a 727. He specified the flaps be set at 15 degrees. He knew the 727 could remain in a slow, low-altitude flight without stalling. It made it so he could guarantee the aircraft keep a low speed without entering the cockpit. He knew the aft airstair could be operated during the flight and also knew the switch in the rear of the cabin could not be overwritten by the cockpit. The FBI speculated that he knew the CIA used 727s to drop agents and supplies during Vietnam. Civilian pilots did not know the aft airstair could be lowered during a flight or that it could be overridden from the cockpit. Ever since the FBI started their investigation, they did not believe that Cooper survived the jump.
D.B Cooper bailed out of a Northwest Airlines jet going 200 miles an hour at about 10,000 feet. The best guess is he jumped almost exactly over La Center, Washington. In fact, a placard from the jet was found near there. But 2 things add to the confusion. 1, at that speed, seconds mean miles, 3 a minute. Any delay by Cooper from when they thought he jumped puts him further south.
They stated these apparent facts: his lack of skydiving experience, his knowledge of parachutes, lack of equipment for his jump and survival gear, the low temperatures and bad weather that night, the wooded terrain when he jumped, the lack of understanding the landing area, and the fact that no ransom money was spent. The FBI really thought that he died. He did not bring any survival equipment with him, but they do acknowledge that they did not know what was in his paper bag he brought on board. It was a cold and wet day on November 24th, 1971 in Portland, Oregon. The day before Thanksgiving, the airport had been busy with travelers. A man carrying a black case approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. The company is no longer in operation, but more recently, it was known as Northwest Airlines. The man wanted to purchase a ticket to the Seattle Tahoe International Airport. A flight from Portland to Seattle was only 30 minutes. The man bought the ticket using cash. He gave the name Dan Cooper. That is the name that was listed on his ticket. Eyewitnesses described the man as a white male in his mid-40s with dark hair and brown eyes. He was wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. He was carrying a black briefcase and a brown paper bag. But evidence of Cooper's death has never been found. A few months after the hijacking, 5 other men attempted copycat hijackings, and all 5 of them survived their parachute jump. In the Netflix documentary, D.B Cooper, Where Are You?, they focused heavily on Robert Rackstraw. He was a former U.S. Army paratrooper and served on an Army helicopter crew during Vietnam. He had a long criminal record. He was arrested in Iran and deported back to the United States. He attempted to fake his own death after this by radioing a mayday call and telling air controllers that he was bailing out with his plane over Monterey Bay. He was arrested in Fullerton, California with charges of forging federal pilot certificates. The plane was found. It had been repainted and was stored in a hangar. Rackstraw was 28 in 1971, a lot younger than the description of D.B. Cooper. The FBI investigated him in 1979, but he was ruled out as a suspect. Ted Braden was in the Special Forces during Vietnam, and he was a master skydiver. He spent 23 months in Vietnam, conducting missions in North and South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. He deserted his unit and went to the Congo to serve as a mercenary. He was arrested and taken back to the United States. He was investigated in the 1970s for stealing $250,000 in a trucking scam. He was never charged for the crime. In the 1980s, he was indicted for crossing state lines with an 18-wheeler full of stolen goods. He was 5'8", had a dark complexion, short dark hair, an athletic build, and he was 43 years old at the time in 1971. Many people in the Special Forces believed that he was D.B. Cooper. Lyle Christensen watched a documentary about D.B. Cooper in 2003, and he became convinced that his brother, Kenneth Christensen, was D.B. Cooper. Kenneth Christensen joined the Army in 1944. World War II had ended by the time he was deployed. He trained as a paratrooper and made training jumps while he was stationed in Japan. Christensen joined the Northwest Orient in 1954 as a laborer. He worked in the Aleutian Islands and later became a flight attendant and a purser out of Seattle in 1971. He was 45 years old, 5'8", 150 pounds, and was a smoker. Florence Schaffner believed Christensen fit the appearance of D.B. Cooper more closely than any other suspect, but she could not conclusively identify him. Skip Porteous wrote a book speculating that Christensen was D.B. Cooper, and on the History Channel, an episode of Brad Meltzer's Decoded went over evidence linking Christensen to D.B. Cooper. Jack Colfelt claimed that he was D.B. Cooper in 1972. He'd been described as a con man. He apparently tried to sell his story to a production company. He claimed that he landed near Mount Hood, 50 miles south of Ariel. He hurt himself in the jump and lost the money in the process. The FBI did look into him, but they concluded his story did not match the details that had not been made public, and believed his story was fabricated. He died in 1975. Marla Cooper believed that her uncle was D.B. Cooper, and came out with this in 2011. His name was Lynn Doyle Cooper, but he went by L.D. Cooper. She was 8 years old at the time of the hijacking, and remembered L.D. and another one of her uncles had planned something very mischievous and involved the use of expensive walkie-talkies at her grandma's house in Oregon. The hijacking happened the next day. Her uncles were supposed to be turkey hunting. L.D. walked in with a bloody shirt, claiming he got into a car accident. Marla claimed that her parents thought that L.D. was the hijacker, and she also remembered that her uncle loved the Canadian comic book hero Dan Cooper, and had one of these comics hanging on the wall. Barbara Dayton is another suspect. He was born Robert Dayton in 1926. Dayton got gender reassignment surgery in 1969 and had her name changed to Barbara. Dayton claimed that she carried out the hijacking in order to get back at the airline industry because she was unable to obtain her pilot's license. But she recanted her story. John List was another suspect who murdered his family a few weeks before the hijacking, stole $200,000 from his mother's bank account, and then disappeared. The Cooper task force looked into him because he matched the description of D.B Cooper and because of the timing of his disappearance. He was captured in 1989 and denied any involvement. The FBI does not believe that he's D.B Cooper. William Gosset is a man who served in the military and who had jump training and wilderness survival. Galen Cook, a lawyer who investigated Gosset, believed that he showed his sons a key to a safe deposit box which he claimed had the ransom money in it. The FBI claimed that there is no link between Gosset and the D.B Cooper case. Richard McCoy was an Army veteran who served in Vietnam and then later the Green Berets. He is one of the men who conducted a copycat hijacking after the D.B Cooper hijacking. On April 7, 1972, in Denver, Colorado, he boarded United Airlines Flight 855, another Boeing 727, with the same aft airstair. He boarded the plane with a paper weight that it looked like a hand grenade and an unloaded gun. His demands were 4 parachutes and $500,000 in cash. The money was delivered at San Francisco International Airport, and he ordered the aircraft take off. While flying, he jumped out over Utah, and he left behind a handwritten note and a magazine with his fingerprints. He survived the jump and was arrested on April 9th, 2 days after the hijacking. He had the ransom money with him and went on trial and was convicted. He received a 45-year prison sentence. 2 years later, he escaped from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary with other accomplices. They stole and crashed a garbage truck through the main gate and escaped. 3 months later, he was tracked down to Virginia Beach. He got into a shootout with the FBI agents and he was shot and killed. In 1991, the book D.B Cooper, The Real McCoy was written by Bernie Rhodes and Russell Calamay. They believed he was D.B Cooper due to the similar hijackings. Claims that McCoy's family believed that he owned the mother-of-pearl tie clip and tie that was left on the plane, and the fact that McCoy would neither admit or deny if he was D.B Cooper, but the FBI did not consider him a suspect. Sheridan Peterson is another suspect. On the History Channel show History's Greatest Mystery, a DNA analysis was done on DNA found on the D.B Cooper tie. This indicated that Peterson was not a match for Cooper's DNA sample. There are many more suspects out there. There's always more suspects being added to the list, and there have been many in the past. It'd be impossible to go over all of them here today. We already went over one of the successful copycat hijackings. Here is some of the others. Richard LaPointe hijacked a DC-9, claiming that he had a bomb, and he demanded $50,000, 2 parachutes, and a helmet. He released the passengers and ordered the plane into the air. He jumped out over Colorado and was tracked using a locator that was put in one of the parachutes and his footprints in the snow. He was apprehended just a few hours later. Frederick Heyman hijacked a 727 in Pennsylvania. He demanded $303,000. He jumped out over Honduras. He surrendered at the American Embassy a month later. Rob Heady hijacked United Airlines Flight 239, Reno to San Francisco. He brought his own parachute and a 357. He demanded $200,000. He jumped and was captured the next day. Martin McNally hijacked an American Airlines 727 from St. Louis to Tulsa. He demanded $500,000. He diverted the flight to Indiana and bailed out. He lost the money when he jumped and was captured a few days later. We are not really anywhere closer today in finding the true identity of D.B Cooper than we were in the past. There is always more evidence coming out there. Even this past week. You just never know when a big break in the case is going to happen. Just like the Amelia Earhart case. You just never know. It could happen in a blink of an eye. So I hope you enjoyed. I really do. And we'll see you on the next. Thank you for watching. Peace.